Hello and welcome to Charting with Dan, where we look at this weekend's box office returns. This is Mr. Dan Murrell,
so
the man
many
with
charts.
The charts.
Always. I love charts.
So many. I love the charts. I love when you chart. So many charts, so little time. Let's talk about Annabelle open this weekend.
Let's talk about the top 5. Annabelle Creation, a movie that I think a lot of people kind of pegged as maybe not something that would open out big. Actually opened a little bit above expectations, opened at about $35 million. Much better reviews than the first Annabelle movie, opened slightly lower than the first movie, but still not a bad opening, especially for a horror movie, and especially in the summer climate that we've seen, which has not been good. Even though Annabelle did well, this was another really low weekend for the box office. This weekend and last weekend are 2 of the 6 lowest grossing weekends all year at the box office, which for August and the summer box office season,
not good.
Not a good sign. I read that last week's combined gross of all films didn't even match the opening of Suicide Squad a year ago. So the big story has been and continues to be the summer box office lagging behind this summer, and August especially is looking to be a big disappointment.
You're seeing my worried face for all of the people we know that work in this industry and hoping that money picks up a little bit.
Yeah.
In terms of horror movie openings, this did very well as a part 2. Or do you think, let's talk about that, but then also, do you think that there's going to be word of mouth, a big drop-off, smaller drop-off on this?
Well, you know, like I said, this opened at about what Annabelle, the first movie, opened at. The first movie, Annabelle, opened at $37 million. This opened just over $35 million. The cinema score, which is the score that they take when people are walking out of the theater, was actually the same for both movies. Both movies got, I believe it was a B, which was surprising to me because I thought Annabelle Creation was actually a really good movie. The first Annabelle did not get good reviews. This got reviews that were a little less enthusiastic than they were for The Conjuring 1 and 2. That's the, you know, it's part of the same cinematic universe. So
the Conjuring universe.
The Conjuring
Controverse.
Exactly. But yeah, if we want to look at as far as part 2 horror sequels, this is one of the top 5 opening part 2s in the horror genre. Paranormal Activity 2, Conjuring 2, Insidious 2, Ring 2, and Annabelle. They're all kind of clustered together in the $40 to $35 million range. What's interesting, though, is if you look at Conjuring 2, Insidious 2, and Annabelle Creation, all directed or produced by James Wan.
Get that man on your movie.
So James Wan is really building a name for himself in the horror space.
Yeah, and they're all Blumhouse except for The Ring, which is not.
Yeah.
And that's correct. Which is an interesting thing we're going to talk about a little bit later, which is there's box office numbers and then there's return on investment. But first, and with that in mind, let's look at the per screen.
Yeah, the per screen average, which is always one of my favorite numbers to look at. This is the amount of money spent at each screen that a movie's playing on. So usually it's either a Star Wars that opens massively and sells at every theater, or it's a smaller movie that's opening in very few theaters. That was the case this week. There's a movie that opened in 3 theaters called Ingrid Goes West, starring Aubrey Plaza. This is a movie that I actually did see this weekend and really enjoyed. I'm going to try to put a review together for it this week here on Screen Junkies News. But this was actually a really good movie. There's another one actually that opened at about $28,000 per screen, which is a really good number as well, called Good Times, starring Robert Pattinson. That I also enjoyed.
Oh, those are the 2 that I didn't end up going to see it this weekend because I ended up staying in and watching What We Do in the Shadows.
Fair enough.
Which I highly recommend that you do.
Movie.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Taika Waititi.
But these are the 2 that I was wondering about this weekend. So Dan, you know, got to pull the trigger. What should we see if we're going to see one of them?
If you're only going to see one of them, I think it's Ingrid Goes West. I think it's really funny. This is a movie that's set in LA, and for me, as someone who's lived in LA for a long time, it hit a particular chord because there are characters in this movie that I know or that I have met or that I have seen. Beyond that, it's a great performance by Aubrey Plaza. This is a movie that she produced. This is the second comedy this summer that she produced. She actually produced another comedy this summer called The Little Hours, which has grossed about $1.4 million, a tiny movie. So she's kind of making her name as a producer as well as an actor, but this is a really good movie. Elizabeth Olsen is in it. O'Shea Jackson Jr., who, you know, as we know from Straight Outta Compton, was great in that movie. Really good in this one. It's a great commentary on just culture and society and friendship and the pitfalls of living your life in public. And if the life that you project is the authentic you. I think it has a lot to say in addition to being really funny. So if I'm going to pick one, it would be Ingrid Goes West, because I think this is a movie that has potential. I don't know if it's got mass breakout appeal, but I think it does have breakout appeal, particularly to a younger generation who might kind of see a mirror to themselves in this movie. I couldn't endorse it enough. It's one of my favorite movies of the year so far.
Awesome. Well, it's on my list, and we're going to talk about return on investment and how busy James Wan is in reality later. But let's look at our summer chart so far.
Yeah, I mean, this is the summer chart. It's not going to change much. Dunkirk jumps Cars 3 to become the 6th highest grossing movie of the summer. I think it's possible that it overtakes Pirates of the Caribbean to become number 5. I don't think it's going to make it up to Despicable Me 3. I don't know if it has another $100 million left in it. It made about $10 million this past weekend. Baby Driver is a movie that we're going to talk about. It broke the $100 million mark for Edgar Wright, for director Edgar Wright, which is a really big achievement for him as far as domestic grosses, and we'll look at that chart in a second. But this is going to be the last week that you see Baby Driver on this summer top 10 list, because Girls Trip is going to overtake it this week. It will be the number 10 movie of the summer, and more than likely, unless their Hitman's Bodyguard or something comes out of nowhere and really in the last 2 weeks of August breaks out, that's going to be your top 10, at least domestically, for the summer. Girls Trip is going to overtake Baby Driver for that 10 spot, and then we're going to be able to really break down the summer and see how everything did. What are the big surprises?
But Baby Driver, this is really notable for Edgar Wright. This is a big hit for him, and it's also, like we've been talking about, a big return for the film. This made a lot of money as compared to what people would have thought that it might have. Question for you as a huge Edgar Wright fan, and let's talk about how it did compare to his other films.
Sure.
Is it the action element of this movie? Is it the hype? Is the buildup? Is it the fact that this is domestically, that it takes place in the United States? What do you think?
I think it's unique. I mean, that's been the word that's been thrown around this summer, is unique, 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 even though you see all of these genre films in the top 10. I think that it came at a time, we were right in the middle of the summer. We were right in the middle of the genre crush. It's an action movie. It's relatable. I think that a lot of times, particularly with the Cornetto trilogy, culturally, maybe from that kind of British UK sensibility to American audiences, it didn't have that kind of mass appeal. This was an action movie. It was something that people could just jump right into. You could enjoy it on a lot of different levels. You can enjoy it as a comedy. You can enjoy it as a romance. You can enjoy it as an action movie. It was that crossover hit that he's been looking for. And I think that it's the kind of thing, in a way, I'm glad that he broke out with this as opposed to Ant-Man, because I feel like this is so much, this is almost the most Edgar Wright of all of Edgar Wright's movies. And I love that this is the one that gave him that crossover hit, not into just a niche audience, but to a much wider audience. And if we look at what this movie has done domestically here in the US versus his other 4, which would be the Cornetto trilogy and then Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
I think you made a chart.
I did make a chart for that. Not only is it the first movie to break $100 million here in the U.S. domestically, it has basically made more than his other 4 films have here combined. This is also by far his largest worldwide grosser. It's more than doubled Hot Fuzz's worldwide gross. It's made about $160 million worldwide. So this is a great summer for Edgar Wright because he now has not just indie cred under his belt, but he has a proven mainstream hit. And I think it just goes to prove that there are a lot of people that would say that directors have to kind of water down their sensibilities to find a mass market, and that's not necessarily the case, I don't think. And I think Baby Driver's proving that point.
I think that there's going to be some interesting lessons from this summer. Let's look at worldwide real quick and look at some of the lessons that we can take from that, including that it's not all about franchises, and it's not all about, well, this is kind of a franchise, the U.S. franchises. That's
the other big story for me from the summer, is the emergence of the worldwide box office, not as a component of the story, but for so many movies as the story of that movie. And not just the summer. Let's look at 2017. Beauty and the Beast, obviously a massive hit here in the U.S., a massive hit internationally. Fate of the Furious, over 80% of that movie's money has come from worldwide markets. That I think is one of the lowest grossing movies in that franchise here in the U.S. Despicable Me 3. If it was just domestic, that movie would be seen as a disappointment. That movie is more than likely going to make $1 billion worldwide. Guardians and Wonder Woman, both big hits on both coasts. Pirates of the Caribbean, huge disappointment here in the U.S. Almost $800 million worldwide. Transformers, lagging. $600 million is going to struggle to get over that ledge worldwide. Wolf Warrior 2, I want to talk about. We talked about this a little bit last week.
We sure did. And you know what? We didn't do our homework and watch Wolf Warrior 1, but I swear to you, this weekend we will.
We will. I'm going to try to get both Wolf Warriors. But Wolf Warrior 2 is continuing to just dominate the charts in China. It's only made a couple $1 million here in the U.S. It is now the third biggest single territory gross of all time. What that means is, country by country movies make a certain amount of money. Number one is the amount of money that The Force Awakens made here in the U.S. Number two is the amount of money that Avatar made here in the U.S. Number three is now the amount of money that Wolf Warrior 2 has made in China. This movie has now become the first non-Hollywood movie to break into the top 100 global grossers of all time. So this is a movie that's not only breaking records in China, this is a movie that is really signaling the emergence of not just the Chinese and Hollywood cooperation. This is the emergence of the Chinese film industry as its own force. Without the cooperation of a Hollywood studio, without even a major release here in the United States, this movie is now making waves with its gross in China alone. Yeah. And I think as the market evolves in the next 5 years, and we probably see China emerge more and more as its own force to be reckoned with, a lot of people are going to point to Wolf Warrior 2 as the movie that, in a way, it kind of is breaking out there in the way that Titanic broke out here in 1997, as far as just people didn't know that grosses could go this astronomically high, and it's proving to be a real juggernaut. And there's no sign of stopping. This is in its third weekend in China. It made more money this past weekend than it did its opening weekend. So there's nowhere to go but up for this movie. And I think that, it's weird because I pull my numbers from a lot of different places. Box Office Mojo does not list this movie amongst its top 10 worldwide grossers of the year. I had to go to other sources to get the information for that. I chose to include that in my worldwide chart just because I think it counts just as every other movie does. But I am curious as to why Box Office Mojo in particular does not list that amongst its worldwide releases of the year, as opposed to a lot of the other plases.
I don't know. We should reach out to them.
I really would like to reach out to them and kind of get the reasoning behind that, because this is a story that, not many people here in the U.S. are going to be talking about Wolf Warrior 2. But I think it's important to notice these things as they happen, because that, combined with how many stories of Hollywood movies are being written based on their worldwide gross and not their domestic gross, I think that is a huge story.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly as it relates to how we view success and failure in the United States.
Sure. I mean, I think over the last number of years, we certainly have been looking at franchise films more as the international, the worldwide numbers are what count. And sometimes, and often, we continue to get films and franchises that are not particularly well reviewed or even perform as well as they once had here, but continue to perform worldwide. We're going to get more of it. But it is interesting. Look, I mean, there's been an incredible history of film in China, and certainly Chinese cinema has had breakout hits before. Yeah. But what's fascinating is, you're right, to watch these numbers and to see, is there going to be translatable films? And that's what I'm curious about, because Bollywood is massive in India.
Huge.
But it doesn't really translate outside. It makes so much money in India. It doesn't really translate outside of India. There have been several Chinese films, House of Flying Dragons here before that will translate, and certainly action films and things like that. Are we reaching an era where it's going to, do you think eventually in the next 10 years we'll see more of a one-to-one?
That's the question, is we've been exporting our movies to China for so long, and that obviously has increased in the last 5-10 years. And I think that has kind of emboldened them in turn to increase their production. Is that going to start going the other way? Is China now going to start exporting movies to us? I don't know. I think that there are a lot of economic factors in that. There's a lot of logistic factors in that. There's a lot of cultural factors. Is, how does their culture translate to the U.S. and how does our culture translate to theirs? And can there be a mainstream hit over there that hits all the quadrants over here?
Yeah.
That's a really fascinating question that I would love to know the answer to.
Me too. And I think that one of the reasons that we often see, like you showed us, the largest worldwide hits in total are things that are big stories, stories that are very easy to understand, that are archetypal, whether it's a Disney story that everybody kind of gets it, or whether it's a big action film that it's really not about like subtle character development and things like that. That is why that has such a large appeal. I'm excited to see Wolf Warrior 1 and 2, and to see how those films do translate. But it's an interesting, there have been some underperformers in terms of franchises here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, let's take it kind of back down to the micro level here in the US, because as far as return on investment, the easiest thing for studios is to make a lot of money in the US because there are far fewer distributors, exhibitors, middlemen like that take a bite out of that apple. You get a lot less of the money made in overseas territories than you do here in the US, where it's basically just distributors and that's about it. You get a lot more return on investment. So let's talk about the box office here in the US, because I think a lot of people are talking about how Hollywood's in trouble and the box office is in trouble. The one distinction I think needs to be made is that the summer box office is definitely in trouble here in the US. This summer is down over 10% versus last summer. However, the overall box office is only lagging slightly behind last year's, and that's because of really Beauty and the Beast. And the spring season really overperformed versus last year. So we had an overperforming spring. Summer is underperforming greatly, but we're down, I think, by about 2% versus last year, which isn't a massive drop. I think a lot of the alarmist things happening are because the summer box office is so down. And when you look at the movies that came out last year, this year, these are just some of the top 10 movies. Spider-Man: Homecoming, it's broken $300 million, but it's still going to make around what Spider-Man 3 made. So it's doing better than the Amazing Spider-Man movies, but it's not back to the heights of the franchise. War for the Planet of the Apes, Despicable Me 3, Transformers: The Last Night, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales. All four the least successful entries in that franchise. Cars 3, least successful Cars movie, and the next to worst performing Pixar movie domestically. So
what's the worst performing?
Good Dinosaur.
Yeah.
Which was not that long ago. So I think that that's where a lot of that malaise comes from, is that, you know, not only are some movies not performing, a lot of them are underperforming, and a lot of these franchises are in real trouble, at least as far as in the US, because they look like they are out of gas. Planet of the Apes, we knew this was the end. Despicable Me 3, we're going to get more, because guess what? That movie's going to make $1 billion worldwide.
I know, there's so many more Minions to come. I mean, when you look at that number, you're just like, my life is going to be filled with Minions for the next 20 years.
My life is already filled with Minions. I see them everywhere, but that's another story.
They're actually an Easter egg in another big movie that I'll tell you about.
But I'm curious to see what Bumblebee does.
Yeah.
After what The Last Night has done, I'm curious to see, is Bumblebee a whole new thing? Or does the stink of this last night, at least here in the US, but even abroad, $600 million,
does it taint Bumblebee's chances?
Does it taint Bumblebee's chances?
Let me tell you something. The reason that I am curious and I have hopes for Bumblebee is because it's Travis. Huh?
Oh, I thought you were going to say John Cena.
Well, yes, because if you've seen him in anything, he's amazing and hilarious.
Sure.
But Travis Knight, who is the gentleman who he's the heir to the Nike fortune, little known fact, or Wikipedia fact, whichever. But he started Leica, and Leica is a movie studio. It gave us Coraline, gave us Paranorman, gave us Kubo this year.
One of the best movies last year.
Pardon me, last year, exactly. And so to me, this is a man that knows how to take knows how to work with story, but B, knows how to take characters that are imaginative, that are larger than life, that potentially don't say much, because there's very minimalistic dialogue in a lot of those films, and make them really come to life. So that is why I have hopes for Bumblebee.
Well, I hope every movie's great. And it's particularly if we're going to get 10 more Transformers movies, I hope that they're all better than what we've been getting, because it hasn't been great.
But it is an interesting thing. The big lessons of this year, I hope, are things like Baby Driver and like Get Out.
And Girls Trip.
Where you're seeing films make a lot of money for a low investment, relatively low investment for something like Logan.
$80 million movie. It's going to make, I think $700 million worldwide.
Yeah. So my hope is that the lesson out of this is let's take risks, let's spend less money, make more interesting movies, and some of them are going to hit.
We can dream.
We can dream.
We can dream.
We will come to you next week, and we will be talking about Wolf Warrior 1 and 2, having potentially seen one or both.
And we've got Ryan Reynolds and Samuel L. Jackson hitting the theaters this weekend with The Hitman's Bodyguard. Is that going to perform? Is that going to open? Is that going to surprise people? The way it's been going in August, it's not looking like it will, but stranger things have happened.
Stranger things have happened. Stranger Things is also coming back soon.
That's true.
I thought that was the most low-key way ever for you to announce that Samuel Jackson and Ryan Reynolds were going to be here to talk about the box office with us. I was like, what?
Next week, Samuel Jackson and Ryan Reynolds will be making the charts.
Breaking here at
Charting with Sam and Ryan.
Thank you, Dan. I love charting with you. This has been Charting with Dan. Very, very informative and fun. Thank you for your efforts and your work and your service.
Always fun. And if I can plug really quickly, I would like to plug our Rotten Tomatoes piece.
Yes.
Something that I'm very proud of that came out this past weekend, and people have been so nice and very generous in how they've received it. But if you would like to check out a little bit about how these movies are reviewed, I would love for you to check it out. I'm sure you'll see it at the end of this video. But it was a lot of fun to do, and very proud of it, and I hope you enjoy it.
I hugely 100% endorse checking out that video. It is awesome. Dan put a lot of work into it, a ton of research. It's incredibly well thought out, very well made, and really important for movie fans to see and think about when we're thinking about how to use these tools.
It's all part of one big picture. The movies themselves, the box office, the way they're received, the way critics review them, the way that you review them. It's all part of this big movie culture, and that's what we all love to talk about. So immerse yourself in it, because it's a lot of fun.
Dive into those numbers. Well, you do the charts.
That's true.
I like to ride the chart train. But if you guys want to make your charts, you can always leave them in comments. Thank you for watching. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Be nice to each other. As Mr. Joestar says, why not?